Let us introduce the keynote speaker for today. For those of you that started studying gemology many years ago, you might remember subscribing to Gems and Gemology magazine, looking into the articles and seeing his name as the author. So I met him by name before I met him in person. Tom Moses, he's the Executive Vice President of GIA, the Gemological Institute of America. He's also Chief Research Officer at the Institute. And by the way, the Institute is celebrating 100 years in 2031. So it's, I expect to be the MC for that. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. And he also serves on the GIA board. Beginning his career in 1977, he was hired by the legendary Richard T. Liddicoat. He worked for 20 years with Robert Crowninshield, so he worked with the big guys. He was really fortunate. And he went from pearls to diamonds to colored gemstones. He was there doing everything with his hands, with the gemstones. So he's an ex-gemstone expert. Now he's one of us, vice president of the GIA. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for a senator of our industry, Mr. Tom Moses. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Roy, for that generous introduction. I don't do any of those things anymore. I miss them, but I don't do any of those things anymore. But you're right, I had great experience. So again, good morning, everybody. And I want to thank certainly Doug and ICA for the opportunity for a number of us from GA to participate in the conference, and Martin and DMCC for hosting the event. And I've had the pleasure to be here on a number of occasions for these, and they're so consistently good. So thank you to you and your team. So since the theme of the conference is the future of colored gemstones, I wanted to share my thoughts on what I believe is an important opportunity for increasing the sales of colored stones. So how can we as an industry look at country of origin or gemstone source from a broader perspective? After hearing Jeff's exciting presentation and the informative panel discussion, I realized I'd probably kind of commingle those two things today, some storytelling and a little bit about lab operations. And then I heard Sean's talk, and then I'm not commingling, I think I'm just mingling the topics. So with that, let me kind of figure out this thing. Is this the phone? Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So, you know, my colleagues, I think are kind of better equipped to talk about some of these. You heard Wim and Aaron yesterday, but I think to give you some context, and Rui used the, I don't know, maybe he's looking at my slides ahead of time, this kind of paradox word. And I do think what I'm trying to blend together is the kind of the technical part of what we do and think of as industry, but also with the consumer in mind. So I'm not going to talk about really the protocols of determining country of origin. Again, the guys are better equipped than me. I am going to talk about, so are we as laboratory and industry being transparent enough with the end consumer with origin reports? And as sources of key gems have evolved, how practical are the historical hierarchies or of legacy sources? And I don't think it's a fad, but this issue with ESG. So what role will ESG now play in providing origin information? And lastly, it's somewhat of a challenge, I think, to all of us. Should there be more of a traceability system in place? So it's not just this kind of scientific methodology that we talk about, but the traceability. And of course, there's the Kimberley process for diamonds, perhaps imperfect, but still has been very useful and improving the confidence and traceability of diamonds. So again, I think a lot of this is obvious to many of you in the room, but so what is this origin report? So the labs issue it, and origin represents this expert opinion, based on documentation that of information gathered. Again, we heard some of this yesterday. But country of origin reporting presents a number of challenges for laboratories, though. So the fundamental question, though, too, with this is should geology, so environment of formation, have more importance than geographic borders? So again, these are, of course, the kind of three methods that we expect to, or environments in which we find gem materials in, but they occur, of course, in different areas of the world. And it's really these environmental similarities that impact the beauty and the appearance of gems, and also, of course, physical and chemical properties where there's so much similarity. So, the underlying comments of origin determination, so gemological properties of colored stones are in part the result, as I said, of the geology. Colored stones from different deposits, though may have different gemological properties, often but not always true. Deposits produce a range of gems. High quality materials at any location is rare. And deposits in some countries have historically produced high-quality gem materials, and I think this goes back to kind of this legacy point that I was making. This is a kind of a telling slide, and when I saw this, I was reminded of, and Doug mentioned in Color magazine, I think Jeffrey Bergman recently, I think quite recently, published an article, and he summarizes a good summary of many of the points I'm raising today, which discussed variability in laboratory reporting. So again, this is well known amongst industry users of the reports. But I don't believe the same level of awareness is present with retailers or consumers. And again, I'm certainly not an expert in pricing, but clearly I think one would argue that they're all beautiful blue sapphires, but I would envision there's probably a four or five times difference potentially in the price. And of course, the labs are making decisions based on the knowledge at that time, which is the best that they can do. But it's also quite possible with new knowledge gained, the opinion, of course, would change, and then it could result in a big surprise to an end consumer or the public. And again, this is when I talk about perhaps all of us needing to have more transparency about this issue. Again, kind of self-evident here, and again, we spoke some about this yesterday. The geology of gem deposits may not be well known, and access to the deposit may be difficult. Certainly Wim can attest to that, and others who do similar exploration. Similar gem deposits found in different countries can have different deposits. So again, and I think this goes to a point John was making yesterday. His point was slightly different about, I think, the way in which the mine or the deposit is being handled ethically or not. But I think, again, there's this also difference of physical characteristics from even within a country. And again, we're making these kind of general descriptions and values are being determined based on a country. And of course, many of the deposits have alluvial deposits, so the original host rock is not present. So understanding the exact origin of it is more challenging. So again, this is kind of a simple drawing, but I think when I use that word, kind of this kind of paradox of this issue, it's simply put, I think, geology doesn't respect geography, and it's the geology was first, and it's permanent, and those boundaries may change. But again, you can see something just so dramatic like this just across a borderline, where a country border where the values could change. And again, when I talk about, again, this kind of transparency with consumer, this is kind of another example. So, getting to the origin, the bottom of the story, and I recall reading this many years ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. But so, to get to the bottom of the origin story, we have to consider when geographic origin determination entered the gemological world or industry. And one of the earliest references we could find in modern literature is the paper written by Dr. Gublin in Gems and Gemology in 1940, where he compares Burmese and Siam or Thai Cambodian rubies. And it's important to note that while with the Gublin lab, Edward Gublin was responsible for issuing some of the earliest origin reports in the 1950s. But in those days, origin was a completely different story. Gublin had far fewer sources to consider, and so often it was much simpler to come to an origin conclusion. And also important to note in his paper, Dr. Gublin makes the case that the origin of a ruby is a reflection of how attractive the ruby is, and makes a link between origin and value or grade. And it reminded me a little bit of, and here I am commingling again, Chris and Aaron and the guys talking about some of the trade terms, like pigeon blood and royal blue. And I think in some ways it's kind of a modern way of, and I'm not endorsing it one way or another, but a means to, I think, describe, it's somewhat a quality term. And in some ways I think that's what some of the early ideas of the report were that Dr. Gublin had. So again, quite simple, much simpler at that time, far fewer sources, and I think it's really kind of supported by even his publication and the of photomicrographs from the 70s that, of course, focuses on these classic sources. So anyway, this is my first meeting with him. It's a while ago. It's more than 40 years ago. And I found this recently as I was getting rid of things or looking for things. And I remembered actually a conversation. So had just been working in the lab a few years, I guess, 5 years or so. I don't remember when it was taken. But it was the time of, shortly after the John Saul ruby, ruby discovery. And I was thinking at that time, and it seemed so simple, I said, well, I wonder if I'd be able to differentiate, because the story was that, and I hadn't seen any then, that they look like Burma rubies. And I guess I'm still, that question still rattles around in my mind about really is it important of where they came from or the quality and what the rubies look like. So this is more of an update of, so that just further suggesting the complication with so many more sources, and I'm not sure this listing is comprehensive, and I'm sure it won't be static either. So there will continue to be more sources. I also mentioned this and again, Aaron and Vim and a few others on the team, not a few others, several people worked on this at GIA. And, we had discussions with our board and again, in part being transparent in the capabilities and the limitations of what can be done with country of origin. And we thought it was important to put this information out. Again, I don't know that we at GIA and are also doing enough providing enough information ultimately, as I said, cascading it down through the trade so they understand what the limitations are. So, and in that issue, there was a quote in there, and I'll read it, and and again, I'm reminded of some of the comments on the panel discussion, and it went on to say, and I don't remember who wrote this, maybe Aaron or Wimwood, or I don't know, maybe I think I made some commentary in here, but the colored stone trade, and this is a quote from the article, the colored stone trade wants laboratories to be able to tell them with 100% accuracy where their colored stones come from, and for these determinations to be consistent between all major laboratories. Sounds familiar from yesterday? And unfortunately, science cannot provide this capability. In fact, science by itself cannot even come close to this for certain gemstones. And most notably was the blue sapphires. And I think that picture I showed earlier is an illustration. So I think it's just an illustration of the reality of the limitations. And to some of you, I look at faces, and Avi, you're probably saying, now I know I have all these different reports, but it's reality. And I think we know that, but my concern again is it remains within the industry and is not making its way through to consumers. And I think ultimately we need to strive to do that. So again, Wim talked about this yesterday, so I won't go into it, but I would just again like to make this comments about, and it goes on to my point about is traditional collecting and analyzing gems and data and reference the database enough. And so, my point is I believe the purpose of collecting will expand to not only include characterization of the gems in the local geology, but the practices related to recovery and the social benefits related to the recovery of gems. As we continue to collect samples at site, an equally important issue are the conditions at that site, environmentally and socially. Is the country with the natural resource receiving its fair share? Again, I said I would probably introduce more questions than answers, but I think as kind of responsible, passionate members of the industry, I think we have to work to bring some of this to light and help for this transformation. And I have no idea. I mean, I just think Sean probably understands it certainly far better than I do, how difficult that is. But I believe it's so important. And it's not impossible either. Botswana, of course, when one thinks about the history and legacy of Botswana. So in 1968, the largest export from Botswana was beef, one of the poorest countries in the world. And those who have visited today, it has one of the highest standards of living in Africa. The the benefit from the discovery of diamonds and the responsible government there has led to incredible infrastructure, free education, hospitals, the roads, and so on. It's really it's a great place to live for citizens to visit, and it's a wonderful model. And again, I'm just not sure that we all of us should expect a mining company to make that happen, but I think forcing and requesting that this kind of responsible behavior happens. And I think, and I believe, and I'll say it later, and I'll say it again and again, there's a huge benefit, obviously, for the people of the country, but I think ultimately this will unlock many more opportunities and sales for the industry. So even from a practical standpoint, it's not only it's the right thing to do, but it will benefit all of us. I said I wouldn't talk that much about the technical things. I guess I don't know that much anymore. But just a couple of things that came up yesterday, just a couple of slides. So, and again, some of it is repeating what was said yesterday, but of course the determination is based on documenting of the properties and the gemological properties and along with the analytical data. And of course, using that as the guide, as the reference to compare with unknown samples and coming to, hopefully, good conclusions. And again, this, you did I don't know where you are, but you did, oh, there you are in the back. You did such a good job kind of spelling out that acronym yesterday for laser ablation. But I just wanted to make a couple comments about it because I think someone else over here, somebody mentioned that they were somebody was drilling a hole in their gemstone. And in fact, there is a shallow, just a few microns deep that's ablated. And that kind of, those particles are transported into this kind of ICP, and it's kind of digested and ionized through this hot gas and then goes into a detector, and that's where these sensitive measurements can take place. But and so you see the image in the middle with the 3 pits, and why so many, which is just kind of another challenge. You know, these, as you know, for those of you who look at all these color stones, they're just not homogeneous. So we often have to take, I think it's common practice to take a number of measurements and then do some averaging. But again, it adds, again, to uncertainty in making these determinations. And just to make a comment about the image on the right, and it seems to be a rather unspectacular image, but it's one that required actually 3 or 4 years of work. And those samples we started with super high purity synthetic corundum, actually grew it, and then doped it with some of the key elements in ruby and sapphire to serve as standards for measuring these elements. And some of it was also done, I think, with diffusion. But this is such an important part to be able to take high quality, repeatable measurements. When somebody was talking yesterday about parts per million or parts per billion, the variability in these measurements can be dramatic, and without a really good standards, it's very hard to get consistent data. So that is something that an endeavor that we worked on, and for those who are interested, we do make these reference samples available to other organizations. In fact, I think NASA, the space agency in the United States, reached out to us for samples of these and a few research universities already. So this next slide, and I've seen it, and it came up yesterday about machine learning and artificial intelligence, and Aaron had helped me with this, and we have somebody who's particularly skilled at this, and a few people on our team. So again, it just gives you some idea of the messiness sometimes in the overlap when doing using chemical data and trying to use it to identify a particular source, and the overlap can be dramatic. But using this kind of multivariate kind of statistical analysis and artificial intelligence, we're really able to deconvolute this information and again help make hopefully much more reliable origin decisions. I think that was the last one, so I won't bore you with any more of that data. I think, again, Avi, it was you or someone else who mentioned, look, why do these get so many reports? I have to get multiple. And I redacted a lot of information, so it probably doesn't even read well here. It's a sapphire with a couple of different reports, and it doesn't matter who the reports are from. That's not my point. The point is it can happen, does happen, but again, how are we kind of communicating that to the retailers and consumers? And again, I think it needs to be more transparent. And what I worry about at times with this information is that we're making decisions as an industry, not necessarily on what we think the best result is, the best technical result, but what we think the best selling result is. And again, this is this opacity, I think, that happens in the industry, and I think eventually that information will eventually, I think, become more, people will become more aware of it, and then all of a sudden, they learn at a later date things change. I perfectly understand the likelihood that as we gain new knowledge and new information, results may change, but I think, again, making that more transparent is critical. So I'm just going to, I'll read this to you, because I also mentioned Ms. Liticote, a terrific leader and gemologist and human being and a great friend, and as mentioned, he hired me. And this was his comment in 1990 about, I think it's important, so I will read it. So this is a quote, "It's my personal belief that sourcing of colored stones misleads the public and imposes artificial price differential. Why should someone pay more for an inferior ruby from Burma? Gemstone purchases are made for the beauty of the stone, not for some artificial differentiation imposed by the trade or a laboratory. There is no question that diamond sales have been improved markedly by impartial grading. I feel that sales of colored stones likewise could be improved materially by impartial laboratory grading of the elements of quality in such stones." Again, this is coming from somebody, I think, with great deep knowledge and expertise. I know there's some debate again in the panel yesterday about using those trade terms, and again, I'm not commenting on whether it's good or bad. What I will say is I think it's a desire, there's an interest to try to describe quality in some way, and that clearly I don't think is the most robust way to do it, but I think that is the intent. By the way, I think in that comment, I also, some of you may know from at least from the research side or that read the technical information, John Emmett made a comment and suggested that we do something like this on reports, that given our current database, we think it most likely originated from X. So even taking a more kind of broad description. So the other point that, let's see, actually, let me go back a minute. I was going to make another point here. I also think sometimes, I'm afraid, we as kind of industry experts assert our biases on what consumers want or should have. Let me give a couple examples. Several years ago, and I think Chris or somebody mentioned it about pink sapphire. So a significant source of pink sapphires, which everyone is excited about, from Madagascar. And I think the industry decided it was best to heat the stones to drive out some of the blue or purple component. And if given a choice to the end client, the consumer, would they prefer the natural color or to have the item treated and turned to be more pink? I thought it was interesting in the Harper's Bazaar data, and I think I captured this right. I was listening and watching. The data in the video from Harper's Bazaar indicates that the female purchasers preferred non-treated stones. Again, I think these are things that we do and biases within the industry that go on that I don't think are consistent necessarily with what consumers want. So this issue, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. We've seen it happen over the last a few decades, and I think we'll see more and more of it, where gemstones are boycotted from certain countries at a given time. And brands in particular, I think, are ultra sensitive about these and are respect these bans. Again, I think they have, and they certainly have more and more growing influence on the consumer. And again, this is where I start to bring in this idea of the social and environmental concerns are increasingly important. So this is, I guess, the simple part now, but it's really be provocative. I think some of our team have seen some of these things before. So the next few slides are all quite similar, but so which ruby is more valuable, and I'll give you some clues. They weigh the same, and both non-treated, and so on, and so you can kind of decide what you think is the preferable one, and then we'll add more information and see if you perhaps change your mind. And I think, again, if we were asking consumers this, I think the audience here may change their mind more frequently than a consumer would. And again, this is where I say I think there's more and more opportunities for non-legacy sources for gems. So same thing here. I think two pretty nice looking blue sapphires. And again, would you kind of change your mind now? Which one you'd prefer. And then I think lastly, I'm going to add a little bit more complexity here, and it'll say the first one on the left, A, is also no clarity enhancement. And so which one would you choose? But more importantly, which one would a consumer prefer? And I think this is where there's so much kind of bias that still enters into the industry, then we either intentionally or unintentionally impose that with consumer. So my colleague I think we'll be here this afternoon and to talk more about, ESG. And I think that, again, this is a great example of the kind of thing we want to see, a former mining area that's been restored. I think in general mining has not a great reputation. But again, I think we as being responsible citizens in this industry should make sure that we encourage and advocate this, for the industry. Let's see. So this was kind of a silly thing I was thinking about in preparation, and I don't even know why I added this in now. But when we think of origin, I was thinking, well, what's kind of, it gives some context. So when we think of things like perhaps some of the copper tourmaline, kind of, I said, well, that might be something like, it's kind of, we can do it, labs pretty well. But then you think of corundum, well, that's 400 times as hard as, and then we think of diamond, well, that's so much harder than everything else. And when I relate that to determining origin, I think diamond will be virtually impossible, although we're looking at that. So anyway, it was just kind of a spurious thought I had when I was putting this together. I think I think this is my last slide. In closing, and I'll just, I'm suggesting that, I'm not suggesting that country of origin reports that many labs issues, including GIA, should somehow be discontinued. I am suggesting that laboratories and industry should be more transparent about the limitations of these reports. I also realize it is still a relatively new practice. So it's really only been the last 30, 35 years that kind of a deep investigation has been going on. And I'm sure more progress will be made through investment in research and new potential analytical techniques and some of the other methods such as AI or machine learning. And I believe the industry should seek out the reports with the best research that underpins the results and not the reports with the best results. I also believe that recognizing new sources with similar qualities to legacy sources be promoted, and the industry should work hard to make sure best practices for recovery and social responsibilities are being followed. I feel confident that these steps will liberate the colored stone industry from historical source biases and create the potential to satisfy more consumers. And why is, just leave with this question, why is origin important to you? And lastly, I just wanted to thank my colleagues who know a lot more about these things than I do, who provided good discussions with me when I was thinking about this preparation. So thank you, and hopefully I saved some time and got us back on time. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. What a great presentation. It was actually food. We could be discussing this for the whole day, from the technicalities of artificial intelligence, analyzing the chemical data that the laboratories collect, to the geology, geography thing. Actually, geography doesn't follow geology, and that is pretty much interesting. And I was pretty impressed with the which gemstone would you choose. Then when we see the origin, we start changing our opinion. So, and this is something to think about. So thank you very much. I don't know if we still have time for a couple of questions. Please take this opportunity to ask Tom one or two questions, one at a time, please, again. Okay, there is a gentleman there. Microphone, please. Can you stand up and say your name?
Hi, I'm Altaf Iqbal, Director of ICA from Sri Lanka. Thank you, Tom, for this extensive lecture on the origin. Now, as a dealer with scarcity of stones from all over the world, right? Consumer demand increasing for gemstones at present, and prices are skyrocketing all over the world. do you think that it's better for the trade to go for the beauty of the stone and forget about the origin? Otherwise, we are just again segregating, we are restricting ourselves, even the designers, the dealers, the jewelers. Do you think that the trade has to, because I believe more stones in the market is more business for everybody. More stones, gemstones in the market is more business for everybody and more accessibility to everybody for their jewelry, for the consumer, for the dealer. What do you think? How should the trade take this origin issue?
So, I don't buy or sell anything, but I do have a thought. And I think often looking historically backwards helps answer that question. I would agree with you about beauty, but when one looks at some of the great jewelers of the world, the Cartier, and you look back at the kind of designs that the Cartier brothers designed, often the gemstones were not the highest quality, or they weren't the big three, for example, or Fabergé is another. There's nephrite in there and other quartzes and things like that. So, in some ways, you're reinforcing some of the points I was making that we should look for new sources and also not presume that we know what the consumer will like. I would make one other comment that I feel pretty confident about. I paid some attention, and I'm sure, again, many of you know more about it than I do. But if you look at like online shopping or the television shopping, how can the television shopping sell 500 tanzanites in an hour, or 1,000 tanzanites in an hour, or some other gemstone, when we, our normal practices in retail might struggle with selling a few at a time. So what it indicates to me is the consumer clearly is interested and the desire is there. So I would agree with your suggestion, though, that beauty, but I don't think we should necessarily decide what the consumer would like. And I think my other point, though, is we really need to, and I think Jeff told such great stories yesterday about gemstones, but let's try to democratize that so we can tell a good story about perhaps a stone coming from gem fields that we know that there was beneficiation that happened to the country. And I think these are the kind of things that will also resonate with consumers. So I don't know if I was helpful in answering your question. That's my thought.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question, please?
Hi, my name is Evan Kaplan. I'm a director also from ICA. Referring back to your photos with the Madagascar, Kashmir, and Ceylon sapphires, as someone who deals in this material, it bothers me that we pay more for certain origins versus others. I've sold some Kashmir stones that were really ugly. I've sold some Ceylon stones that are absolutely beautiful. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the origin reports that we get play a big part in our business today. But at the end of the day, what do we sell? We sell beauty. I would like to see dialogue and discussion on possibly making origin not so important and basing what we do and the pricing of our materials on what I call the beauty factor. And I would just like to see more discussion on this, and maybe we can have some changes positively. Thank you.
Yeah, and Evan, again, your colleagues know a lot more about this than I do, but I would strongly suggest a group coming together and talking about how that can be done. I happen to agree with you. I do think there's I'll call it that ESG, which diversifies more and gives more credibility to perhaps some of the non-legacy sources. But at the same time, how do we talk more about the beauty or the attributes. So, but anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much.